Thank you for visiting our channel. If you like the content that you see, please don't forget to like our videos. Also subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you can be updated on when we provide new content. Thank you so much.
All right, so let's get this going. So thank you, Michael Jones, for joining us today. Michael, I think when I met you originally about 8 or 9 years ago, what I remember right out of the gate was that you had a passion for bringing the conversation of technology and counseling into the same space. And I think because of the conversation I had with you, I think that very same day I went out and got a digital Dropbox account, and which I still use today, and it has been invaluable. And so you made a change the very first time I met you, and of course I think over the years many in the counseling field know you as not only an excellent counselor and a counselor educator, but someone who has owned the space certainly around supervision and how to think about doing that with technology. And so I'm super pleased to be with you and with Tim Stauffer, my colleague and partner. And so I really would just like to and I think that the little backstory is that Tim and I, right before we met you, probably in a year or two before I met you, Tim had been talking with me about getting into technology as far as counseling, and we met with a lawyer who said at the time, there's really not a lot of case law out there, and there's a lot more legal pitfalls than you want to get into, and he really did a good job at scaring us away from that space. Yeah. And I think though that in these 8 to 10 years since then, the field has grown up and developed a lot. And for me to be holding on to some of those views that maybe had legitimacy 10 years ago would be unfair, and it would be unfair to my profession and probably clients that we could be serving. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this space, and particularly, I think I'd really like to just know, what is telemental health counseling?
Okay. Well, my name is Michael Jones. I have been a therapist for 17 years now. I got into this on accident, if I'm being honest with you. I was working for a university, and we had students at a separate campus that we were having to drive up, and it's about a 4-hour drive each way to see our students. And so they wanted us to get a training in telemental health counseling. During that time period, there was only one person in the nation that did any training. But when I went to take the training, it was 15 PDF documents. And so you read the PDF documents and then take a test, and then boom, you're able to do online counseling. I thought that was a little scary. So I went ahead and got my specialization in it at that point. And after I got my specialization, I went to my board and and talked to them about my training in it and how I think there needs to be a different training. So I took about 8 months and wrote my own training for telemental health counseling. And then you can kind of fast forward a little bit, and that company went out of business. They were looking for someone to step in to become a national trainer. So since about 2014, I've been training individuals in telemental health counseling, and I've trained roughly 4,000 people this time period and doing telemental health counseling. So I've been doing it looking at from the supervision end of it as a point of it, and also from the practitioner point of it as well. And so here we are in 2020, and everything is still going strong.
And the name of your group or your practice is Renewed Vision Counseling Services. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the counseling end of my services, and then for our training, it's called Renewed Vision Training, and that's where we do all of our online trainings.
Right. And anyone in the counseling profession can go to that site and see a whole series of modules. What are some of the modules that you have, and what are some of the more popular modules that people take?
Gotcha. So the most popular one people take is the one we call the Telemental Health Counseling and Supervision Certification. It's a longer one. It's about about 15 hours training. That's the most popular one that individuals take. We have another one that's specifically it's called a turnkey ethics. So there's places like Talkspace, different things like that. And so learning how to use those spaces in an ethical manner. And then what we have training specifically on supervision as well. So we try to, like I said, we try to cover billing, doing that in an ethical manner, and that way when people get finished, they know what they need to do to get started in doing telemental health by the end of that.
So what is telemental health counseling?
Okay.
So can I just there's a blizzard and my client can't make it to my office, but the client says they really want to talk to me, and I give them my FaceTime account and we do a session on FaceTime. Is that telemental health counseling? Help me understand what really are the basic nuts and bolts and the things that are not telemental health counseling.
All right, so the basic of telemental health counseling, so it's been defined as four different mediums that you can use in order to connect with the client. One of them would be video-based, like we're doing right now. So you can do video-based counseling, and that will be considered telemental health. Using the phone, even though we may not realize that is considered using telemental health. Also, email. People have been using email as well as a way of doing an asynchronous way of connecting with people, with their clients, and also chat-based. And so those will be the four different ways is what is considered telemental health. With all of those different types of telemental health counseling, the issue then comes in that what is the most appropriate way to connect with the client, and which of those are HIPAA compliant, which we'll talk about a little bit of that today as well. And so that's the main basic way is I am transmitting my client information through some type of electronic source, and so I'm able to connect with them either face to face or through the phone, or through text or through email, or through chat, and we're having a counseling session either synchronously or asynchronously. That would be the official definition of telemental health.
So what are some things that are not telemental health?
I think the best way of saying it is what is not telemental health is making sure we have the right software to be able to do telemental health. And so you had mentioned like FaceTime, for example.
Yeah.
So there are people who will use that for that. The problem then becomes looking at our federal laws that we have out there that protects client information. And so I think most of us in the mental health field are pretty familiar with HIPAA and making sure that anytime we're dealing with client information, we want to protect that to make sure we're following under HIPAA guidelines. But I think back in 2009, they came out with this thing called HITECH, where basically anytime client information is being transferred electronically, we want to make sure that we're covering that information as well. So we have to find software that is HIPAA secure, and then we practice it in a HIPAA compliant manner. And so that's where the difference kind of comes in, is that we can have software that meets all the regulations that HIPAA is looking for, but as a practitioner, we have to be compliant and making sure we're using it in the right way. And so making sure that, have a business associate agreement with a company. So anytime a company has contact or has the ability to connect with my client's information or has access to my client information, I had to have a signed business associate agreement from them. That way, it protects the client's information from that perspective. And so if a company is not willing to sign a business associate agreement with me, then I don't want to use that software. And so, those type of protections have to come in. So, when you mentioned like FaceTime, for example, Apple's not going to send you a business associate agreement to work with them, because I'll be sending them all over the place. And so,
yeah, I typed, just to curiosity, just a day or two ago, I typed Adobe Connect and said, "Is it HIPAA compliant?" And I got back several hits saying, "Yes, if," and then it said, "if you have this business agreement." So this would be an example. And so there's probably some kind of relationship you enter into when you have an Adobe Connect contract, or that says that you're using a version of Adobe Connect that's compliant.
Exactly.
So that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, it's making sure that the software they're using, that they recognize they're dealing with private health information, and because of that,
Mm-hmm.
they're signing off saying we're not going to release this information as well, and that way the client's confidentiality stays where it needs to be. And so you are entering into agreement. You get actually a signed form from that company. Keep that in a secure place to prove that you have that. And those things, just small things like that, are super important to make sure that we have those things in place. That way, if there's ever an audit or whatever the case may be, we can show we are practicing in a compliant manner.
Gotcha.
So there are some telehealth services like Simple Practice, Therapy Notes, etc. Does a private practitioner need to secure that kind of agreements and keep it in their own file? Or if you're using those HIPAA compliant platforms, is that embedded kind of in part of the service that you're buying from those kind of companies?
I got you. So, so when you think about electronic health records, when you mention like Therapy Notes, Simple Practice, things like that, you're signing a business associate agreement from the get-go. Whenever you start to use that software, I'm gonna always, they have a way for you to upload that to their system, but I'm always a person, I like to back up everything. And so, when we were talking about Dropbox a few minutes ago, I'll back up everything possible in Dropbox. That way, if my computer goes down, I've got it somewhere in the cloud that I have this business associate agreement with them. And so, yeah, a lot of the electronic health records, they signed that from the get-go. And so if you do use Telemental Health, like video specifically through those services, you've already signed a business associate agreement with them. You just want to, once again, make sure you know what that is at all times.
Gotcha.
So as I was listening to you and Tim interact, it allowed me to step back for just a second, and I was started to think about telemental health counseling from the client perspective. And I'm very curious in having done this for quite a while. How do clients experience these different modalities, either by phone or maybe email, or in a high-tech capacity like the video conferencing that we're using here? What have we learned about this space from the client perspective?
Well, from the client perspective, one thing we are learning is that, and I'm quoting statistics, but I can't tell you where it's coming from because I've talked about this so much. But one thing we've noticed is that about 70% of people who are doing telemental health have never been in counseling before. And so for a lot of people, this is something that they really enjoy being able to do, because they don't want to walk into a counseling office, or maybe the depression is in such a space where they don't want to get out. So this allows them the ability to be able to have those counseling sessions. But on the opposite end of that, I think for clients, there is a bit of fear. When people are concerned about, well, who's listening in and things of that nature. I think we have to be mindful that there are some anxieties that our clients will have with this modality. And so part of that is I think we have to be educators with our clients to help them to understand what we can do on our end to keep their privacy safe, and on their end, things that they can do as well. So part of that may be, I'm going to make sure that they don't save their password to whatever software they use on the computer, those type of things. And so that way it keeps everything private. One thing that we're hearing from clients, it's nice for them to be able to do it from their home, but even with that, they need to have a quiet space where they can do it. And if they have kids running around, things like that, that makes it a little bit more difficult. So it's definitely an adjustment from like an in-counseling session versus what you like in office setting versus a session where you're doing on video, because you do lose some of the things that we've been trained to look for in counseling. So even this video right now, y'all can see from by this part up on me, and that's about it. But the reality of it is there's a lot more other stuff that could be going on. So if I'm pretty nervous and I'm tapping my foot, things of that nature, you miss that. And I think of an example, a couple where we're doing a session, and the wife kicks the husband because he says something he shouldn't have said or whatever, and he goes, ow, And so I would have picked that up during the counseling session if we'd done it face to face, but with on video, until he said she kicked me, I wouldn't have known that's what was going on. So you do lose a little bit of some of the the body language that we're trained to pick up on. But I think it's one of those things we're still able to eventually get in the long run there.
Do you ever feel like when you do counseling that that you think to yourself, especially in the video, where having good technology is so important? Did you ever think to yourself, this isn't working, and it's not working mainly because of technology getting in the way? So I guess I'm asking a broader question, and that is, how much does technology sometimes get in the way? Like, so for instance, they're using an iPad and a poor Wi-Fi router, and so they look a little bit more like a Minecraft game than they do an actual video conference.
Yes, their ability to have good connection in mind as well is that becomes extremely important. And we still live in an age in 2020 where there are people who still have dial-up, and so because of that, we have to make sure that we have strong video connections. And so, so one thing I always will tell people, make sure you're connected. If you're using the computer, be connected directly to your modem when you're doing that, and or to your router, instead of using Wi-Fi. I think we're so dependent on Wi-Fi right now. We don't realize that when we use Wi-Fi, our signal drops down significantly, and we're losing some of that bandwidth we need to have that. And so, yeah, that can be a problem, especially if the technology they have is a little bit outdated, and then it looks like they're kind of like in a witness protection program because you really can't see who they are. And so, yeah, that definitely can become a concern at times.
Tim, anything you want to ask around just kind of the topic of what is telemental health counseling?
Yeah, I think as I think about it I appreciated those reflections about from the client's perspective. How would you encourage a seasoned clinician that's been working in person, face to face, and the hesitancies that they might have in making that modality work for their client and for them, and what are some of the kind of characteristics that therapists ought to develop to really maximize the use of telemedicine effectively?
Okay. So I think, on the first question on being able to work with a seasoned therapist, I think, I think after someone has been doing counseling for a long time, we kind of get set in some of the things we've done and the way we do it. And so, which is not a bad thing whatsoever. I think what part of this process has been, and this is part of the process I've been in the past 8 years, and convincing people, is helping them to see how they can broaden their base of being able to work with clients because of being able to use technology. So I live in the South, and if someone scratches their head too hard, it looks like a blizzard, and so we shut down everything. So when we have clients who have to cancel because of weather, this becomes another way for them to be able to get in and be able to have those sessions. We have a lot of clients sometimes who transportation becomes a big issue for them, and they're dependent on other people. And so this, once again, provides a way for them to do that. Another example I use is I used to work in community mental health, and we will have sometimes have clients who will come in, but they have a social anxiety problem, but they walk in and the lobby is full, and so they already have social anxiety. They come into a counseling office, and now their anxiety is going up. And so by the time I get to them, we're spending the first 10, 15 minutes getting them calmed down before I can actually get into the counseling session. And so I think we see there are some advantages here that we're able to it broadens our base, and it gives the clients more ability to be able to get in and to see us. And that way there's a continuity of care. And especially the way times are right now, when we do have a crisis going on, and we're being encouraged to stay at home, things of that nature. The reality of it, people's mental health needs don't go away just because we're being told to stay home. And so we want to make sure that we're still being able to provide those services to the best of our ability. And so I think for those who've been around for a while doing therapy, I just try to help them to see that this is something that can be an addition to what you do. It doesn't have to be your total goal to be 100% online or anything like that, but it can be something that can supplement what you're doing already. And I think I've got the best reaction from that perspective, because there are people who do a 100% online practice. I personally don't. I do have a good mixture of that, because I think it's not for every client. There's some clients it's not the best for. And so that's the perspective I'll go on that first question. Now, go ahead.
Okay, I was just thinking, my next question was going to be, and you just referenced this, are there particular clients or particular issues around which telemedicine is contraindicated? Like, for instance, I do a lot of behavioral addiction work. It's kind of one of my area of specialty. Is probably about 80% of my practice. And so I think part of what I'm wondering is, like, are issues such as behavioral addictions, are there things I ought to be considering related to telemedicine that may make that not a good modality for any particular issue or a problem a client's facing?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple overarching things, and so I think, like, for example, if someone is coming in with an internet addiction, I'm probably not going to be looking at them doing video-based therapy with them, and then just because, I mean, they already have that issue anyway. So that would probably be a clientele I wouldn't work with. There's some children that you in certain age groups simply won't do it. Now there are some people who will do play therapy, different things like that, through video, but and so they've come up with different ways to be able to do that. And so I think, once again, it's going to depend a lot on that client and the maturity of that client whenever you're trying to connect with them to see if this really is a good thing for them. You know, if I've got a client who has had multiple suicide attempts and they're constantly in a crisis mode, me being at a distance from them may not be the best thing. It may be better for me just to see them in my counseling office like I normally do. That way I'm able to pick up on on the body language and things of that nature, where I may once again lose that if I'm doing that through video. And so I think it's one of those things where we have this, a lot of this is on a case by case basis, where we do look at our clients. We talk to them about their being comfortable enough doing this modality, and for some of them, they're ready to jump on with it. And also, as a therapist, we just kind of have to make that assessment of, okay, do we feel comfortable working with this client in this modality or not? And for some people, it works out great, and for others, they may try it a couple of sessions and they're like, I just don't like it. And so it's one of those things where there's some trial and error with that, because it's one of these things where it's not for every clinician and it's not for every client. And so there is a lot of kind of give and take on that, and we kind of get into.
You know, that's a really, I think, terrific point you just made, and that is that the modality needs to be reflected in the treatment planning. So if you start working with a client in some kind of telemental health capacity, are you having benchmarks to check in and see, is this working? Is this effective? Is the client able to meet their treatment goals? Is this satisfactory for both the clinician or the client, or do we need to think about doing something else? So it almost seems to me that this becomes a critical point to front load and put into the treatment plan, and to have frequent or regular, I should say, discussions with your client about how is this going? How is this working out for us? And that kind of leads me into, I think, kind of a really big question, and that is, perception's really big here. And so I think, when a client drives, 15 minutes to an office, and they go in a professional building and they sit in a nice office and they talk to a clinician, that feels like a transaction that is different than, again, just getting on their computer. So do clients pay for telemental health counseling, or do they feel like, I'm doing this from my house. You don't have the overhead. Maybe you're doing it from your house. Why are you worth $100 an hour to do this? And so my question really is, will clients pay for this? And it's really kind of a perception-driven question, I think. And then, will insurance pay for this?
Yes, I'm going to say yes on both ends. So clients are willing to pay for it because, once again, if it's what fits them. Let's think about a couple who is separated and who is wanting to work on their relationship, but they feel like right now it's not the best time for them to be in the same room together. And we've seen situations like that before. And so they're willing to pay to do the video-based services, because during that time period that helps, where they may eventually move into a online, into the on ground face-to-face type of session. So we have multiple people who do pay will pay the fee, the cash fee for that. And also insurance companies are getting on board with that as well, with paying for the sessions as well. So that's one thing we've seen that's especially over the past 4 or 5 years, that's changed significantly. 10 years ago, you've been hard pressed to find anybody that was reimbursing for telemental health, and to the point now where the majority of insurance companies are doing that based obviously on what state you're in and everything. And so there's different rules for where you have to be at during the time of the session, where the client has to be at the time of the session, things of that nature, and different paperwork you have to fill out. But the majority of insurance companies are saying, yes, we will cover telemental health, but they just have some different ways of billing and things like that you have to do. So yeah, so we're seeing a reimbursement is one of those things where we're able to do telemental health counseling, whether it was a cash based or it's an insurance based type thing.
So if you're a counselor like Tim or myself, and I have not been doing this kind of work, and I want to begin to move into this, what are some practical trainings? And I know you have some, and so please feel free to mention that your own work. What are just some practical steps that I need to do, or that Tim might need to do, if we want to start to really think about this as a piece of our clinical work that we do?
So I'll just talk about an overview of just some things to consider, and then we can talk specifically about trainings. I think the number one thing is looking at the HIPAA compliance. To me, is like the number one thing that we just cannot overemphasize. Is just making sure that we are finding software that we're going to use that is HIPAA secure, and we practice it in a HIPAA compliant manner. That to me, that's one of the big things we definitely want to make sure we're doing first of all before we do anything else. I think that's the starting point of it. Thing two is making sure you have the right type of equipment to be able to do telemental health. I've spent money to make sure I have the good equipment. So like I don't use my regular video camera that came with my MacBook. So I have a video camera that has a light on it. So I keep the light back behind me and on the camera. That way it even though I get this nice little shine on my head here, you can still see my face, and it doesn't cover my face up. And so having the right kind of lighting in your room makes a big difference. Microphones, that makes a big difference. Once again, if the client can't hear me that well, it's going to cause some problems. And so I always use the one I have is quite a bit more of an expensive microphone, but there's a lot of good microphones out there that you can use that'll work out well. And just earbuds. You can't get any better than just a good basic pair of earbuds. Now, I must confess, I do have an earbud addiction, which we'll talk. That's a whole other video in and of itself. So I have multiple pairs, but you don't have to spend a bunch of money on earbuds. But I think it's important to have that to be able to block out any background noise on my end, and also for the client. And it still helps keep things a lot more private that way, because even if somebody is in the counseling office walks past, the only thing they're going to be able to hear is what I'm saying, and they don't know what the client is saying because we have the headphones, and that helps out quite a bit. Also, the internet service you're using, and how fast that is. And I know depending on what part of the country you're in, if you're in a major city, you can get fiber optic, and it's super fast and wonderful, which we love that. But not everybody's in that situation. And, so making sure you have a fast enough internet speed. And I think a good way of being able to judge that, if you can stream Netflix from 2 or 3 different devices at one time, then you probably have pretty good internet speed, being able to be able to provide services. That helps out quite a bit. Another thing is just with the computer that you're using is making sure all the background applications that you're using are turned off. So, maybe you like Spotify or Apple Music, whatever the case may be, and it's running in the background. But even with it running in the background, it's using up data. And so, and same thing with like Dropbox. So anytime I do any type of video services, I will pause my Dropbox. I will shut down anything that's in the background that's using any data, because I want to make sure that the picture is crisp, they can hear me, and there's as few distractions as possible. And so those are just some of the few basic things I always make sure that I want to have covered whenever I'm working with that client. As for training, there are a multitude of places out there where you can get training. Obviously, Renew Vision training. We do training, person-centered tech. Roy Huggins does an excellent job. He's a guy I look up to quite a bit. That is just in the tech world. That he does a lot of trainings. It's just like the Zer Institute is another one where they do trainings. And so for me, those are some really high quality trainings that you can go to and get the things that you need. And it's by people who have been in the field for a while and who practice. They don't just talk about it, they practice it on a regular basis. And to me, that's a big part of looking at the trainings, that I don't want somebody training me that talks about it in concept. I want somebody that's actually been in the field doing it. And so that makes a big difference on the training aspect of it.
Tim, you ready to jump in? Get some, you want to go telemental health counseling starting Monday?
Well, I certainly have the capability. I just signed up for one of the online electronic notes companies, and they offer a telehealth option that's HIPAA compliant. And so I just last night nailed down, make sure I can make the technology work and build connections, and set up my daughter as a test client, and we hooked up our computers, and voila, I'm ready to do telehealth all of a sudden. So there's an element where it's like the technologies and so forth are pretty quick and easy to get set up. I think like one of the things I want to think through is that want to make it available in a current crisis that my clients that are needing to cancel or are afraid to come out. I've had several, probably in the last 2 days, I probably had 4 or 5 clients cancel, even though they were not restricted from doing in-person sessions. Their own concerns for health led them to cancel. And so I quickly said, I'm actively working to get telehealth up and running so that I can give you that option if you would like to pursue it. And so I suspect some of them may say, yes, we want to pursue that. So the big question for me is, assuming all the aspects of HIPAA, all those things being compliant and in place, what are some of the ethical concerns, ethical aspects that I really need to pay attention to, be aware of, that may not be immediately evident through my own critical thinking, but from your experience, and what pitfalls might I run into, or should I be aware of?
One of the ethical things that it pops out is, for some reason, I'm not sure why we think this way, is that we will get training and we are now able to start doing telemental health counseling. For some reason, people think that means I can see anybody throughout the country that I want to see, and there's no problem. And that's false. Let me make sure I say that. That's false. You can't do that. The rule of thumb is basically being wherever you are physically at the time of the session, and wherever your client is physically at the time of the session, you need to be licensed in both of those places in order to be able to offer telemental health counseling. Now, there are some exceptions to that. Florida recently passed a law where they allow people from out of state to get registered to offer telemental health counseling in their state, but you can't actually have a physical office in their state. And so Florida offers that. There are some states where they'll allow you to do up to a certain number of sessions with a client in their state, and that without having a physical location there. And so the main thing is to do your research on the states you plan on doing counseling in. And so, like for me, I'm licensed in Arkansas and Tennessee and Pennsylvania, so I can basically do it all across the board in those 3 states. But I'll purposely just stay with Arkansas because it's hard enough as it is getting all the information I need about those clients. And if a crisis comes up, I need to know where are the local hospitals, or who's the local community mental health people, things like that. And so with living in Arkansas so long, a lot of that is just secondhand knowledge to me. But I've not lived in Tennessee in a long time. I haven't lived in Pennsylvania in a long time. And so those things I don't know off the top of my head. And so I just basically kind of just stay to Arkansas, even though I have the ability to do it in multiple states. And so I just think whenever we start going and you look at multiple states, there's a lot more homework we have to do on our end to be able to practice that way. So I think the counseling cross state lines is a big issue. Um, Another big ethical consideration we to look at specifically with ACA, it talks to us about with our clients which I think a lot of people are kind of forgetting, that we can't force this modality on our clients. They have to be able to be comfortable with it. And so even though we may be in a crisis or whatever the case may be, if the client is saying they don't want to do telemental health counseling, we have to back off and let them be able to make that choice. And so, and that's the thing we always go back is, I'm a reality therapist, so I'm big on choice. And so, and that's what it's kind of basically echoing, is that the client must have choice. And if they don't want to do telemental health, we can't force them into it. And so I can be as convincing as I want to be, but if that's not what they want to do, then we had to make the choice of, okay, then I need to push them out for further until we can do face-to-face sessions again. But the client, when it all comes down to it, the client does have the choice on whether or not they do it. And our code of ethics reflects that as well. And also, I think the third biggest thing is just verifying who it is that you're talking to whenever we're doing it. Anytime a client comes into my private practice, I should be checking their ID to make sure that I know that this client I'm seeing is actually the person whose insurance I'm connecting with, so we should be doing that anyway. So same thing with telemental health. I need to make sure that if I'm doing a video session, that if I'm seeing John Doe, I'm at the beginning of the session, I'm going to do some type of video verification work. I need to see your ID, your state ID, and if the picture doesn't look the same, or if I'm having doubts about those type of things, then I'm going to have to make some decisions on whether or not I'm going to continue to work with the client or not. And so I will verify their identity that way, and then we'll come up with a password or a code word that we will use at the beginning of every session to make sure that this person is who it is. So let's just say, for instance, we're doing a video session, and for some reason the video goes out and I need to call them to see what's going on. I'll call and ask for John Doe. And then when he gets on the phone, I'll say, so can you please let me know our password? And if they're like, what are you talking about? I have no clue what you mean. And then if they don't have no clue, then I'm not going to continue that session. So that's something I do at the beginning of every session, according to NBCC's, their code of ethics is that I verify at every session who this client, this counselor, who this person is I'm seeing. And so I verify where they are at the time of the session. So, especially if I'm doing video, and so if I'm seeing your picture at the bottom and this room looks familiar, every time we meet, I have idea, okay, this is where we are. But next time we meet you in your car, I'm going to ask you, say, where are you? I didn't know where you are at the time of the session to make sure that we can continue on. And so that client verification of where they are at every session is just very important. And also who this person is at every session is important.
Sure. So I remember back, Mark, when we met with the attorney 10 years ago, one of the aspects related to telemental health at that time was that you had to have your first session with the client in person before you could meet with them, whether it was on the phone or through any kind of online modality. It sounds like that has changed. And can you talk a little bit about that? Does that sound familiar to you, or is that perhaps just an Ohio anomaly?
I would say in a perfect world, I would like to be able to see my client for the first session in the office. We're not in a perfect world, so that doesn't happen. I've seen plenty of people before who've never set foot into my office, but we've still been able to do everything because we've been able to, with the electronic records I use, all the intake paperwork is sent to them. They do it online. It all comes back to me signed online already. During the first session, we verify, and I have that go into the client record. And so, yes, like I said, in the perfect world, I think, yes, let's try to do the first session in person if we can do that. But the reality is that doesn't happen a lot. And so my thing is I try to make sure I do everything I can to get all my bases covered before we actually begin the session. And so a lot of electronic health records are making that so much easier now to do that. So yeah, I like I said, ideal world, yes. Practically speaking, it doesn't always work that way.
So perhaps this is a supervisory type of question, or maybe a bit more of a case study, but I specialize in helping clients with sexual addictions. It's not at all uncommon for me to have someone drive 2, 3, 4 hours, sometimes even across state lines, to come and see me because they, one, are afraid of somebody knowing them in the office, or pastors who really would like to get help, but they know they would lose their job yesterday if they ever ask for help. So there's this element where I see telemedicine as perhaps being particularly useful in helping people begin the process of telling their story, opening up, getting some really significant professional care. And yet on the other hand, as you mentioned earlier, if someone has addiction to the internet, the idea of doing telemedicine almost feels like on the face a problem. So help me think through that a bit. What are some of those types of, how should I think about some of those kinds of issues?
So I appreciate you bringing it up. So there are a lot of people who just traditionally don't want to come into a counseling office. Regardless if we want to admit it or not, there's still a stigma when it comes to mental health and getting into counseling. And so for many people, this makes it a lot more available to them. So I've worked with pastors. I've worked with so many different people who maybe they're a professional and they don't want to come in, or they're a government official, whatever the case may be. And for them, it is more important for them to get to therapy. And so this works out in a great fashion for them, because they can still get the counseling and things that they need. But once again, they get to keep some anonymity there. They don't have to drive out and walk into the office where other people may possibly see them. And so this becomes a really good option for them. And so for them, they're just thankful to be able to have that service. And then especially cutting down on traffic time, things of that nature, it does make a big, big difference for them. And so, like I said, my state is pretty much spread out. So I've seen people all over my state, and for similar reasons of that. I can remember back a few years ago, back when I was a pastor, I was driving an hour each way for counseling because it was kind of the same thing. I want to get the counseling I need, but I work at the only counseling center in town. And so I'm driving an hour this way, driving an hour back. And so I'm a therapist and I know all the therapists in town. So back then that would have been great. And that was one of the things that kind of got my mind kind of going in this direction when I started this whole process, was that I know what it felt like for me to have to do that on a weekly basis, to go that far, 2 hours and an hour in therapy each week for a while. And so I was like, there has to be a better way of doing it. This does help a lot of populations to be able to have a way to get the therapy they need without having to commit to all the driving time and things of that nature. And like I said, especially for cancellations, it helps out quite a bit on cancellation, things of that nature. Because sometimes people are running late or whatever the case may be, or we're going to be in town a little bit later than I thought it could be. Hey, we can do this through video, and it just works out. And so it does help out quite a bit in that way.
What about group therapy?
You can do group therapy. So being I teach online, and so that's I've been doing it for about 8 years now. And you can do group therapy. I love groups. I love doing on ground groups. I'll just be honest. If I had a choice between two, I'm going to do an on ground group, hands down, any day of the week. But the reality of it is, some people can't always make it in for that. And so I think it's a very viable option to do an online group. But I think that the thing where technology comes into play, even with just the three of us on here, there could be some technological glitches that could happen with just a three. So imagine have a group of 10 people, and then the group leader, it just multiplies. So it's doable. It's very, very doable. It's just one of those things where you have to continue to make sure everybody's using the right software, the confidentiality things, and just being very clear that what the purpose of it is. But yes, you can definitely use a group, and there's software out there that allows you to be able to see multiple people at one time. And so yes, group is definitely possible. I think we'll see a lot more people doing that, because especially when like the population that you primarily work with, if they want to come to a group session, this may be a good way for them to be able to do that once again without having to drive in, and that's the stigma they're feeling can go away, because they're still getting the help they need without having to get out there.
Sure.
I have a question, just thinking about from a training aspect, and I believe we've mentioned before we got online here, started recording today, that you're going to be doing some additional modules that maybe you'll send my way. But as a counselor educator, I have students right now in field placements and practicums and internships. And with the crisis in America with the coronavirus, many of these students are looking at difficulties in meeting the expectations for their classes as far as client contact hours. And so we've seen a lot of the states relax the laws and the rules around how services can be delivered. And so it's kind of an open window I think for telemental health counseling. But at the same time, we just don't want to turn these students loose in a milieu that they're not trained and ready to do. So imagine I'm sitting with a group of 5 or 8 practicum or internship students tomorrow who say that at their settings, they've been given permission to do some kind of telemental health counseling. What are some real quick little things? Like, I know the HIPAA, the technology, anything else that maybe you would encourage these students to be thinking about as they kind of open up their laptops and begin to see clients?
I would just tell them to be confident in the skills that are been placed within them, because even if they are still doing it by video, they still have professors who are going to be watching out for them and going to be looking at what they're doing in those sessions. And so I think just trying to talk to their anxiety more than anything else could be a big piece to that. Obviously, some type of training, which I think is still just necessary for that part of it, because if you're still working at your theoretical orientation, all these different things like that, you have all these different things going through your mind of how you want to do this. And so I think right now, I think this is a good time to learn some skills they may not have learned from the get-go. So I think I try to look at this as more of an opportunity more than anything else. And so that's the kind of way I approach it. But like the stuff I was saying before, just with the students, I think they need to have these experiences, but just to make sure they're prepared for that, so that they don't get caught off guard if something happens with the clients, especially if a client goes into crisis, things of that nature.
Yeah.
I'm just now learning crisis counseling. So, okay, I've got this on ground. How do I do this on video? So just having those basics down so that they're prepared to be able to do that. And so I think as supervisors, as I do a lot of supervision for postmasters, but also for interns, students too, but just making sure they're leaning a lot more on the supervisor to see, okay, are my skills still coming across the way they need to? And I am having to concentrate a lot more on picking up on things. Which to me, I think this is actually a good thing for them to have to learn, even though it's in a short time period. So I think it's going to make them a better therapist overall.
I'm almost wondering if I'm even overthinking that question. So, I'm thinking like a 50-year-old guy, whereas, a lot of our students that are in master's programs right now, they're in their 20s, early 30s, and they're much more fluid and comfortable with the technology. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if this group of students that are coming through and the next generation of counselors, whether this isn't a much easier just transition than I'm giving it. I think they just might be able to just do this, and it's just going to be like breathing to them.
Yeah, for some of them it will be. I mean, a lot, you're talking about having these digital natives. I mean, they've been around technology their entire life. My concern would be for maybe some of our non-traditional students this has not been their world over and over again. And that's where, to me, that encouragement comes in, that you can do this. And the reality of this may be for a short time period. So just because you're getting the training, you're doing it right now, once the crisis is over, if you want to back away from this, you totally can. And I think that's the thing that I think for everybody at this point, I think there's always going to be a need for traditional face-to-face counseling. I don't think that need is ever going to go away. I just think we're in a situation right now where it is smarter for us to be delivering our services in an online format for the time being. But once this crisis is over with and contained and dealt with, and we get the chance to go back as business as usual, we've learned some new skills. We've been able to expand more people will obviously know about what telemental health is about. But now you have some options to be able to say, you know what, that was fun while that lasted, but I'm going to back off and just do traditional based
Yeah.
counseling. But now but you have options. And I think anytime we have options, that's helpful for practitioners and also for clients. I think having those options, so the client may say, you know what, that was good. Like, can we go back to doing another thing? But then now it's in their head because they've done it before. It's not so scary because I've done it already now. And so I think right now as educators, this is a good time to learn, and they're learning some new skills under duress, but they're still learning some new skills. That's going to help them to be prepared for the future. Because
Sure.
when I started talking about this stuff back in 2012, it was like, oh no, this is not going to be around anymore. This is the future. We're going to be using this more and more, and I think situations like this are helping us to see that. And so, good time, sometimes a good crash course in life, that things aren't the way we want it to work out, and we have to be flexible and adjust.
Right. So I think lastly, my last big just kind of question or quandary is, and I know this is a space that, again, you've been really in and owned for, you're our national expert in, and that really has to do with supervision. And so we've talked about a lot so far, but I think what makes the counseling profession different from a lot of our cousins, like psychology and psychiatry and social work, is we have a lot of emphasis on this term supervision. And I think that's our distinctive. One of our distinctives as counselors, that we believe in a very effective approach of doing supervision with young therapists, training therapists, and even being lifelong consumers of receiving supervision, no matter how long you've been in the field. And so supervision is a big topic, I think, in just who we are. So how do you think supervision works, or what have you seen that how it's worked, and what, I guess just speak to the whole topic of supervision in this technology-based platform.
Well, one thing that I've been practicing online supervision since the beginning. That's how the only reason I got into this was because of online supervision, and it's helped out quite a bit. Because one thing that we've had, at least in the state I'm in, we've traditionally had a shortage of supervisors, and so the laws had to be changed and written so that all of supervision didn't have to be in person with the supervisee, which has opened up a lot of doors. So I could have a client in, like I live in Arkansas, so I've had people literally driving from Mississippi, driving in from Missouri to work with me to do supervision 2 to 3 hours, and every other week for that. And people say, why did they come so far? I said, well, they have that ability they have that flexibility now to be able to do that. And so I have the ability to be able to set up they can have a video camera in their office where they're seeing the client, where I can actually see kind of a live supervision type thing. I'm able to do that. Where there's no way possible, I'm driving to Mississippi or Missouri to be able to do that. And also just gives them some flexibility for them when it comes to finding a supervisor, because there's some areas where they just don't have someone, and so that it just helps them to have that backup plan of having someone who can look in on what they're doing and see what they're doing, and that way it's not always just tapes. People love sending in their videotapes, which is great. I like, but sometimes it's nice to be able to see what's going on live in a session, and getting back to that, the in the ear type counseling for the supervisee. And I think this opens up that realm quite a bit, where we're able to see in the midst of that what's going on, and being able to work with our clients that way, or supervisees that way, when they work with clients, versus them just watching the video 2 weeks later, say, well, you could have done this, you could have done that. And being able to open that up. So for me, I think this opens up a big window for supervisors to be able to see the supervisees in a different light, and be able to give them some right in the middle of the session help that they may not necessarily be getting. So with Dr. Newmeyer here, I'm doing supervision for him, and I'm seeing that he just really went way off task with his question. So we may have you might get a text that says, what's going on? What happened with this? And so it kind of makes you think of what to do. And so that can be going on through the session where they are learning these skills automatically versus learning it after the client is going away. So I think we've got to get this a really good opportunity right now with the doing. And that's one of the main reasons I even got into this part of it, is with the video base.
Yeah, I would think that it would feel less invasive to have a supervisor watching through a video feed than having a supervisor behind a mirror or in the session with the client or in the counselor. So I think that's a really great point, that it's a way of having high quality supervision and yet minimizing your footprint in the session at the same time.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah. Something to think about. Very good. What do you think, Dr. Stauffer? Anything else here?
Yes. Well, thank you. That is really helpful and some great insights, and I think really important material for me at my own professional development and within my private practice. But as I also think in terms of counseling education, these are topics that we're only beginning to scratch the surface of when I was in grad school at Ashland, and I'm glad to see that there's some real developments in the field, because I think it's a modality that really has a lot of potential value. I can see there's ways that I could integrate it into my practice and offer a level of service, and perhaps to another slice of the population that I would say is at risk or that may be underserved, but may find this modality opening the space for them to get some really good help. And so I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us, and I found it helpful at multiple levels. So thank you.
No problem at all.